Hey everybody, thanks for joining in this video and welcome. This is the fourth video in a series called Beginnings. My name is Michael Venema, and thanks for checking out this video and thanks for checking out the channel. So when I first started this, I thought, we'd be looking at some of the key features of the Bible especially, and looking at its importance for society and politics and sound thinking and a lot of different key issues, culture and so forth. And I thought that we'd be able to get through things kind of quickly, but I'm discovering that with these first few, where we're looking at the opening pages of the Bible, there's so much there that it's taking a little bit of time. We spent just the entire first session just looking at the opening sentence of the Bible, which I always like to identify as the most important sentence ever written, which I think it is. So we are at the end of page 1 of the Bible, so to speak, the first chapter of Genesis, and which is really one story of God creating the world through the spoken word. And we picked up on a few things there. I'll remind you about some of them because I think they're so key. That story doesn't actually end until a couple of lines into the second chapter, so we should try and cover that and then do a quick recap of what's there. Maybe even highlight a couple new things, and then we'll get into the second chapter, which is another second account of the creation. So in the first one, there's some incredible things that come out in that first chapter, the first account of God making the world there. And one is that God is revealed as being incredibly gracious, pouring out his blessings on all things and all people. He's giving place and room for all the creatures of the world, and especially for human beings. So there's this incredible sense of the giftedness of the created world, and especially that giftedness is really driven home for human beings, for the first people who show up. And then as the story unfolds, tremendous blessings are poured out on the human community. So have children, have families spread out over the earth, fill it with your societies and cultures and all of these good things. So God is revealed as, he's kind of like a royal, majestic power speaking, and then things come into being according to what he says, but also unbelievably gracious and giving in all of this. So that's one of the key things there. The way God is presented, the way people are presented, is also something we should just take note of very quickly, because the stature of human beings in this opening chapter is just tremendous. People are created in God's image. So you're not God, but you're meant to be a little bit like God, which is an important thing to know. You and I should be embodying, goodness and all the things that we like to attribute to God. So human beings are called to fill the earth, to create cultures and societies and all these things, all these kinds of riches. And some of that will also come out in the second, as we cover the second chapter in just a few minutes. So we see God being presented, and we see the stature of human beings being revealed in this first chapter. So this, and I mentioned this in a couple of the earlier videos, all of this is kind of a counter story to the predominant story that was filling the minds of the people who were first hearing these stories or were cultivating them or carrying them forward, and those were the Jewish people in Egypt around 3,500 years, give or take. No one knows absolutely for sure, but so the Jewish people were enslaved by the Egyptian powers, and the Egyptian powers believed that they were manifesting the power of the gods over their Egyptian lands, and that the Egyptian rulers were descended from the gods and therefore had license to conquer and enslave their surrounding neighbors, which is the situation that the Jewish people found themselves in. So this story chapter 1 of the Bible emerges as a counter story to the idea that there should be a few rulers ruling on behalf of whatever gods they have and enslaving vast numbers of people. The first chapter of the Bible shows that all human beings are created in God's image. And you might like to notice that this is something that is a common idea in at least the Western world, that all human beings have intrinsic dignity. Some people detach that from God, which I think is a big mistake, but nevertheless, it is an idea that is extremely powerful in the Western world and continues to spread throughout the planet and has a very positive effect wherever it goes. So some people think that this first chapter of Genesis is there to create a war with science or things of that sort, but I don't believe that at all. I think it's exactly the opposite. This story is the basis for a free and educated and we could say the word dignified, but culturally rich and happy society. We should understand that the depth of that story, and so it doesn't signal a war with modern science, not at all. In fact, it makes the sciences a joyful and purposeful project. And there are quite a number of people who've noticed that in the Western world, science is really carried forward with enthusiasm. And the first story of Genesis, even though many people have forgotten it, continues to have its impact on the development of the sciences and of all the incredible things that we try and do in today's world, because we are created by God to do good and wonderful, you might even say godlike things. So one other quick comment, maybe two, before we move on to chapter 2, or I shouldn't say chapter 2, but the second creation account. And so the first comment is, yes, we are godlike, but we are not gods. So there are people who try to present themselves as being kind of God, and I'll touch on that a bit later on, but we need to keep that distinction. And the second thing I want to say about the first creation account, before we move to the second, is that at the end of the first account, God emerges as a God who rests and who celebrates. He looks over the vastness of the world he's made. He's very happy with it all, and he rests from his work. And this also ties in with the notion that you and I are called to be a bit like God. Part of that is we work and we rest. We have we are called to work. In fact, if we don't have meaningful things to do, we start to feel kind of meaningless and not very valuable either to ourselves or other people. So we are called to have meaningful work to do, whatever capacity we're able to do that in, and we're also called to rest. You're not supposed to work 24/7. This is not good for you, and it's not good for people. So we're a bit like God when we maintain that balance between work and rest. In the creation account, it's 6 days of work, 1 day of rest, and that's a pattern that seems to work for a lot of people. But that's maybe a topic for some other time if we ever get to it. Okay, so that brings us, or at least brings me to the end of looking at the first creation account. I want to go to the second one. There are some parallels between the two. So first, a couple words about parallels and differences, because some people think that The second creation account kind of fills in some empty holes that the first one left open, but I don't think it's really like that. I was taught differently, and I think that's the correct way to look at it. I think that there are parallels. They both start off with some kind of chaotic situation. In the first one, it's very wet chaos, and the second one, it's kind of desert, so you can't really live there. And by the end of the first creation account, things are placed in order. Life is welcome, and there's reason to celebrate. And that happens at the end of the second creation account too. Things are kind of put in order, and there's cause to celebrate. And we'll get to that in a couple minutes. So there are some parallels, and you could read the two accounts and probably discover more of them. But I want to also mention a couple of the differences. A key one is the way God is presented. In the first one, God speaks and things come into being. In the second one, God creates as a sculptor. So he for example, he makes human beings out of the clay, the soil, depending on the Bible translation, out of the soil. So he's a sculptor, and then he creates, so to speak, a statue of a human, and breathes the breath of life into the human, and the statue becomes a living being. Anyway, I'm getting a bit ahead. I'm going to take the time just to read a few lines and then comment. It may take a bit of time, but I think these words are so unbelievably important for the entire planet. So here's the beginning of the second creation account. At the time God made earth and heaven, before any grasses or shrubs had sprouted from the ground, so there's not much happening in terms of living things. God hadn't yet sent rain on the earth, nor was there anyone around to work the ground, for the whole earth was watered by underground springs. God formed man out of dirt from the ground and blew into his nostrils the breath of life. The man became alive, a living soul. So I've kind of covered that in some comments a couple minutes ago. So I'm going to go to the next paragraph. And by the way, I'm reading from a version of the Bible called The Message, which you can look up online. It's along with lots of other Bible versions. It's at BibleGateway.com. Just you can check it out there. So then I'll just going to read the second paragraph, and this is how it goes. Then God planted a garden in Eden in the east, and he put the man he had just made in it. God made all kinds of trees grow from the ground, trees beautiful to look at and good to eat. The tree of life was in the middle of the garden, also the tree of knowledge of good and evil. So we should think about this a minute too, because again, God emerges as a very gracious and free giving God. He's just giving the first man a place to live. It's a fantastic garden. So there's that. The other thing to notice is that there's two trees, and one tree is a tree of life. So I think the idea is that as long as the man or human beings have access to that tree, they can continue to live forever. And we'll come upon that theme a few, one or two videos later, depending on how quickly we get to it. And in the second tree is the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And I think that what this tree is all about is that the knowledge of good and evil. This was an old Jewish way of saying everything there is to know. If I'm remembering the word correctly from my student days, it's a merismus. It's got one extreme over here and one extreme over there. You name the extremes, but actually what you mean is everything between the extremes and including the extremes. So good on one extreme, evil on the other. So these are named, and what you're really thinking about though is not just the two poles, but everything that's in between. Well, the knowledge of everything is something that is appropriate to God. So the kind of the symbolic thing, I don't like using that word too much, it's a bit weak, but maybe it's one that's easiest for most of us. The symbolic thing going on is that the people are not meant to eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, because that's symbolic of aspiring to take God's place. And we'll get to a little bit more of that in just a couple of minutes. So the garden with 2 trees, and then there's this description of this fabulously rich area, which is an area which is in the Middle East. A river flows out of Eden to water the garden, and from there divides into 4 rivers. The first is named Pishon. It flows through Havilah, where there's gold. The gold of this land is good. The land is also known for a sweet scented resin and onyx stone. The second river is named Gihon. It flows through the land of Cush. The third river is named Hikadel and flows east of Assyria. The fourth river is the Euphrates. So some of these features exist on maps today. So the idea is that whoever is putting the story together is relating it to this very rich area in the Middle East, very fertile area with lots of precious stones and building materials, and lots of water and lots of opportunity to grow and to flourish. So that's all there. And then it says, God took the man and set him down in the Garden of Eden to work the ground and keep it in order. And this is what he says. He says, you can eat from any tree in the garden except from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Don't eat from it. The moment you eat from that tree, you're dead. So I'll talk about this. It's kind of I don't know if it's a threat, but it's sort of there. We'll talk about that a little bit later on, a video or 2 later on. But where it says, you shall not eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, so you shall not aspire to be God. So 2 comments about that last thing, and then we're going to end for this video, because I want to keep them a bit manageable in terms of time for you. So again, remembering that the Jewish people were slaves in Egypt, and they were under the rule of the Egyptian pharaohs, who definitely thought of themselves as God and godlike, who had the power to decide who should live and who should die. And what they decided, you had no recourse. So this second chapter, where God says, you shall not aspire to be that kind of person. Well, that is a good thing for people to know. There are people, who are quite ready to aspire to godlike powers, to decide who should live and who should die. We can name some names: Hitler, Mao Zedong, Joseph Stalin, Pol Pot. These dictators and people like them, they are quite ready to decide everything about what's true and what's false, what kind of knowledge should be suppressed, what kind should be manipulated for the better of their political prestige and their powers and so forth. And they are quite ready to decide who should live and who should die. So there's a hopeful note in this chapter that is not the kind of path that any human being should take. So I'm going to end there for now, and we'll cover the rest of the chapter in the next video and see how far we get. Thanks a lot for watching. See you next time. Don't forget to subscribe and like and share and all those good things. You may have noticed things are changing a little bit visually. I'm trying to improve the gear and so forth as we go on. So thanks for hanging in there with me, and see you next time.